will be interesting. It's also new. There are a lot of talk about the digital currency, the central bank digital currency, and how it may actually be affecting the makeup of the global payment system and the financial system, right? So along with that, the impact at the macro level as well as micro level, all right? So this will be like the broad picture for the speakers to share with us. And of course, along with that, please feel free to share any other part of wisdom that you have. And I'd like to start with our first speaker. That is Mr. Georg Chmiel, if I pronounce this correctly. Georg, please.
Thank you, Dato. And today is actually our anniversary. It's the 5th time you're moderator, and I'm proud to serve for the 5th time on your panel, which I'm quite honored. One day I want to be moderator myself. Okay, now, so what are the topics I want to talk about? The whole area of crypto got a lot of attention most recently in the media. But I mean, the first thing we shouldn't forget, the value of all cryptocurrency is less than $1 trillion. And the value of all properties in the world is about $350 trillion. So we're talking about a fairly small amount, which gets a fairly large attention. Even the money supply in the world is about 100 trillion. So crypto is less than 1 trillion. FTX is an example that regulation is needed. It's not an example that crypto is dead. Crypto does work, and with many new technologies, it takes some time to get used to it. When trains were introduced and they were driving at 30 or 40 kilometers an hour, people were run over by the trains because nobody was used to, that there were things moving so fast going on those tracks. And the same thing will happen with crypto. They will help us make global trade and digital trade much safer. We've reached now a point where actually the digital innovation is almost being slowed down because the access to the chips is getting scarcer and scarcer. But I don't think this is a permanent situation. This is more a temporary situation in the post-COVID world. Digital foreign relations will get a lot of attention. To me, it is absolutely important to have harmonization in this field, because if you're on a blockchain which crosses multiple countries, if there are issues being determined in terms of the resolutions, you can very easily get into the normal government domain. And at the same time, also, there's on the flip side, every bad thing has also something good, is opportunities. Multiple countries can use blockchain and simplify, the trade, the interaction among themselves. Data is the new oil, people have said, or plutonium, which is more the Western view, but let's call it the new oil. We have seen in the past that some Western countries started wars because of oil. Let's hope we don't ever start a war because of data being the new oil. The other thought I had at the end is one day we need to decide, can we trust companies more or can we trust governments more to administer such important matters like the cryptocurrency, like the ultimate truth, which is being created through this platform. And governments are sometimes a bit slower in the implementation, but historically have always proven to come up with a more sustainable outcome, which is less personally oriented, a slightly more for the broader community. And I would hope that a partnership between the governments and the businesses can actually help in rolling out digital currencies fast as well as safe. As I said earlier, regulation will be the ultimate aim. If it's not controlled, Web 3.0 and anything around it has the potential also to derail governments. So I think governments are well advised to join in on the initiative and work with the industry together.
Wow, thank you. So you have taken like 3 minutes. That's pretty concise. And thanks. And because you wrap a lot of things there, because you talk about from, that digital currency that's worth less than 1 trillion in total. But compared to property, that is like 350 trillion. And then a currencies combined is about 100 trillion, right? And of course, crypto is actually has a room. And the question is this, how would crypto actually be so-called accepted, expanded? Is it to be left to the people or the government? You throw a question, we shall explore a bit more later on, right? Of course, you touch on data sovereignty and so on. Now, let's move on to the second speaker with also the first 5 minutes of your sharing. I'd like to invite Dr. Lijin, who is the chairman for the Silk Road International Foundation and the China Silk Road Group. So Dr. Yan, please.
So the gentleman said, now the digital technology developed very fast and also become very important for the international cooperation, especially between China and ASEAN relations. So I think the digital channel or digital Silk Road will help, this kind of, relationship and cooperation. And as just now the gentleman said, the Belt and Road Initiative now is 9th year. I think after 1 month we'll come to the 10th year. This initiative will go to the third 5 years. So I discussed with many organizations. We think that the Silk Road will go to the third generation. I think the general, you can say the general 3, or the version 3. Version 3 will be the digital Silk Road. So to prepare this, or to they help the set up the digital Silk Road, we
I was told that we need to be comfortable with pause in the communication process. Yeah, I think first we practice that to be comfortable with a pause. After that pause period, I think we will need to improvise. So in this case, I would like to move on while waiting for Dr. Yan to be ready. And in this case, the third in the list, as you would have noticed, is our speaker by the name Mr. Chhem Siriwat, who is the director for Center for Inclusive Digital Economy, ASEAN Vision Institute, and advisor, Council for the Development of Cambodia. So, well, in this case, Mr. Siriwat, yeah, the floor is yours. Yeah.
Thank you, Dato. Nice to see you again. And also Mr. George, who's there physically. Very warm welcome from Phnom Penh, Cambodia. So let me just get straight into the topics of discussion. So number 1 on digital trade and supply chain. In my perspective, I think sometimes we tend to overcomplicate these terms and processes. When we add the word digital in front of it, it becomes a little bit confusing. But if we break it down simply and to be more practical, I can say that after joining a few of these events organized by KSI, it comes down really to connectivity, right? Anything that we do that is digital is about connectivity, starting people to people, and then through organization to organization, and then between nations. So just to give a very concrete example, after, let's say, the 2 previous KSI events that I attended with very well-connected and distinguished panelists, we've had our group chats on WhatsApp and Telegram, and through that, there have been many practical links. I can say that with 6 or 7 panelists, maybe 4 or 5, we get connected, and maybe out of those, there are some project proposals, and then in the end, some go through and some don't. And that's just the reality, but I believe that that is how true connectivity starts. So thank you to KSI for that. And I think related to digital trade and supply chain, it's really about using digital platforms to facilitate trade, to connect different stakeholders in the supply chain. And we have to remember that it doesn't always have to be complicated. It doesn't always have to be involving AI or blockchain. It can be as simple as a social media group chat. So I think that's the first. Second is on digital foreign relations. This is a topic that I've studied very closely. My thesis was on diplomacy and sovereignty in cyberspace. So digital diplomacy, cyber diplomacy. I would say, just to maybe simplify, that digital diplomacy is about using digital platforms for diplomacy. So again, people to people, organization to organization, and then through the nations, different usages of social media, from Facebook to Twitter, and how it is to the outreach of public policy. Cyber diplomacy, a little bit different, more of governance and diplomacy within the cyberspace, how to regulate the internet, sharing different forms of governance. And again, I think it's not a problem of the internet or the network, but it is really coming to consensus on different people and different nations. People think differently from different backgrounds, different religion. And so there's so many factors, right? Not only about the technology, but which kind of side we come from, whether it's engineering, social science. So I think putting all that into perspective, having events like this, sharing experience, sharing practices of governance will bring us closer together and understand how we view the internet differently or cyberspace differently. Thirdly, on digital currency and implications, definitely a hot topic. I understand that different countries are in various stages. Some are more accepting to digital currencies. We have to remember that not all digital currencies are cryptocurrencies, right? Digital currency is a bigger umbrella where you have on one side centralized, let's say central bank digital currencies, and on the other you have decentralized cryptocurrency. I'm not going to say whether one is better than the other, but I think that it's important to understand both sides. If we look at various countries around the world, some have opened up to cryptocurrencies at one point, and then the month after that, they shut it down. And this has gone back and forth multiple times over many years. But what I would say is that the general population around the world, we're starting to understand more the value, not just the, let's say, market and the fluctuation of the price, but actually what kind of value is added by using these technologies. So that is just my quick run through of all three parts. I would say that the key point here is connectivity. And again, people to people is where it all starts. And mutual understanding and respect at the end is the most important. Thank you.
Wow, so beautifully put, Mr. Siriwat. Thank you so much. I think the core, like you say, is connectivity, because all this, especially people-to-people connectivity, that will make the whole world go round, right? Okay, thank you. And we shall move on to our next distinguished speaker from Indonesia, Mr. Yohanes Lokiman. Welcome to this particular session. The floor is yours.
Thank you, Mr. Moderator, distinguished guests, fellow speakers. Well, likewise, like the previous panelists, I'll just get straight into it. I'll make a few brief remarks. Thank you for the guardrails, Mr. Moderator, that you introduced for the topic. So let me break it down into a few basic points. One is the context, COVID-0. And in regards to normalization of mobility and supply chain, China is still in the very beginning stages of relaxing its policies. The signaling has changed, primarily from the COVID task force led by Vice Premier Sun Chunlan. So we need to be aware that this relaxation is only in Tier 1 and Tier 2 cities where there's plentiful healthcare. And in rural areas and Tier 3 and below cities will see slower relaxation of these COVID policies. What does that mean for digital? I guess you could say that it means that our push, and I mean ASEAN region, it means we need to push harder for digital economic relations with China because the emergence is upon us. Business as usual will not resume until the second half of next year, around the second golden week. So there's a lot of opportunity still for us to take advantage of the increase in things like e-commerce and digital payments, because offline in China is still in the minority. So onto that second topic, which I referenced, which is the opportunity. There's still massive opportunity in digitally enabled cross-border trade. This uncertain path of emergence from COVID-0 means there's a large gap for us to tap. The GMV of cross-border e-commerce in Sichuan province has gone up year on year amazingly. I think since last year, it's gone up from October to October at least 50% to around 80+ billion yuan. ASEAN as a region should be capturing some of this export volume to China. In anticipation of the ramp up next year, because we produce a lot of the inputs for intermediary goods manufacturing to China. But I've been talking about the real economy so far enabled by digital, but talking about pure digital commerce, MSME digital participation is also something we should be looking out for. China has opened its door to China-focused exports. One example of this is that major Chinese e-commerce companies are working on enabling cross-border e-commerce because of the supply chain disruption that I think everyone listening in is aware of. AliExpress itself has a plan to cultivate at least 50 to 100 e-commerce merchants from the ASEAN region within the next 2 to 3 years. So there are opportunities for MSME traders to get involved in China's digital economy. I'm very glad also that this my previous panelist referenced my fourth point, which is digital payments. In ASEAN, and Indonesia is the chair of ASEAN next year, we will be pushing for full cross-ASEAN adoption of QR-based payments, which has already been adopted by the ASEAN 5, namely Malaysia, Thailand, Philippines, Singapore, and Indonesia itself. And me as part of the Indonesia's ABAC, ASEAN Business Advisory Council, we're looking about whether we can involve the +3 countries in this QR-based scheme. And those 3 countries, of course, are China, Japan, and Korea. So if this is enabled, QR-based payment between China and ASEAN, it will open up a whole lot more tourism, Forex income, and these are all good things that we really need when we're emerging from the pandemic. And I think my last point is on how ASEAN as a region and the views we have on digital regulation, which the moderator referenced, are quite compatible with the views of China. During my past year's tenure as the policy manager for B20, the Digitalization Task Force, we had Ali Cloud in there, we had AWS, Azure, all the hyperscale cloud players, right? In addition to the top 100 digital companies in the world. It became clear to me that we have a lot more in common with China in regards to data sovereignty and the importance of basic digital infrastructure than we do with so-called other Western advanced nations, so to speak. And I think that in ASEAN, actually, we are a lot more advanced in some of these developed markets in terms of digital building blocks for digital inclusion. And we should strengthen these foundational building blocks and the interconnections of those foundations with China. Why? Because China is doing one very significant digital master plan called China Standards 2035. So this is different from Made in China plan, the Made in China 2025 plan. The China Standards 235 master plan is about making the right rules and making the right standards, not competing on the tech itself, but about the standards, right? And this is a whole different game altogether. It's about setting standards for 5G, 6G, IoT, quantum networks, blockchain. As my previous panelist referenced, CBDC, right? And if we can get into that game early, you know, if ASEAN can feel, in this context, perhaps more appropriately, read the tea leaves, and we can get in there early, we'll get a head start and build that even closer connection with China, who I believe, if we can go on the past achievements of Made in China 2025 master plan, this China Standard 2035 master plan should be equally successful, if not more. So there's a real opportunity for us. We need to grab it soon, both in retail, real trade and digital trade and payments. And I believe that the discussion today will set us well for the people listening in to get on that train very early. Thank you, moderator.
Well, thank you, Mr. Johannes de Lokiman. So you have actually started off with, the China zero COVID policy, though it's easing, may actually come to the end only towards this Q2 next year. And thereafter, the whole suite of opportunities from trade to, supply into China, into the payment, to the manufacturing supply chain, to finally you highlighted about the standard of which ASEAN could actively take the role to participate, right? It's great. Yeah. Thank you very much. And I'd like to move on to my next speaker, who is actually from Europe, Switzerland, Mr. Felix Statter, who is the president of the Swiss Chamber of Commerce, Chamber of Commerce, based in Zurich, and he has also done a lot of work between China and Europe. So we'd like to kind of pass the floor to Mr. Sutter, and please share your wisdom. Thank you.
Good afternoon, and thank you very much for having me here. Unfortunately, I will only travel to Malaysia in about 48 hours, so I still have to be in Europe and not being with you in person. The topics are very interesting indeed, and we have heard from the previous speakers, there are various aspects. I would like to, what Siriwat mentioned before, what are the practical impacts? I think the Digital Silk Road, for me, is addressing one of the concerns that we have identified during the pandemic. We've identified that we have a number of supply chain issues. And the Digital Silk Road can help to identify where we have gaps in the supply chain logistics, in the sourcing, etc. It can help with for the companies, but also the countries to identify where are alternatives. So how can this linkage for supply chains happening with digital tools? We talked about WeChat before, WhatsApp group, but also kind of the automated systems we're having, the IT systems we're having, link them together and identify, hey, I cannot source it from China because we have a blockage in a certain port, etc. But maybe I can get from a different port in China, or I can truck it to Vietnam and truck it and ship it from there, or source it from Malaysia. So these are, for me, very practical elements of a digital Silk Road where I can connect faster and connect the data linkage together and then source physical goods. Because what are the markets? The markets are Europe and the US. Many goods, many countries, many economies in Asia are export oriented. They need to export their goods for their economy. So that's what I see, a very practical element. So how to serve these gaps? The second thing is about the digital foreign relations. I think we have what we're doing right now. We have this Zoom, and as you mentioned before, we started chatting with each other. This is the chatting which takes place at every conference usually. But in Zoom, we don't have this time. So the interactions that usually take place on the side of a conference is not taking place in a Zoom call. So how to do this? And of course, there's the risk that we kind of now overhearing everyone, our little chit chat, but that's exactly what we are missing right now in digital interactions. So how do we overcome this digital foreign relations, this element? When I'm looking at the budgets of the companies, they slash to 50%, 30% of travel. So they don't come back to this level which people travel. So we need to find a way to create a digital way to connect. That also means we have to connect regarding regulations. So how do we do regulations? And how do we overcome perceived differences, misunderstandings? And that's something where we maybe need more time, because then digital is not time saving. Digital is costing us more time, because until we have understood what the misunderstanding is, a certain word is just because maybe of a different language. An Australian speaks different English different than a UK person, a US person, or us who have speak English as a second language. So maybe the term is not chosen by purpose, but because of our skills level in the language. So how do we overcome this? And that means, for me, also harmonization of cyber laws. We need to be going with an open eyes. What is the intent? What is the intent behind it? And then don't be fussy about the wordings. We talked about digital currency, and we have seen this relative importance, the relativity of the importance of digital currencies. But this non-deniable, it's something which will grow. So now we're making the bet of the future. So how do we do this? How do we instill transparency, not on a nation level, not on a trade block level, but on a global level, that something like FTX cannot happen? Because this is to the disadvantage of all of us. So how do we create an environment that all of that is needed? And that's what I see is the homework we have all to do, and go with open eyes to it and address this with all the various players in it. Us as a Chamber of Commerce, very practical, and policy body who comes from a more kind of meta level environment. That's my contribution. Thank you, speaker. Back to you guys.
Well, thank you, Mr. Sutter. Yeah, so interesting. You talk about digital Silk Road. That is to kind of facilitate a new market. I mean, to fill the opportunities that is in the bigger market, Europe and US, and there are gaps there. So therefore, the export could actually flow towards filling the gap. And foreign relations, interesting enough, you again come back to connectivity with people before many other things can happen. So digital connectivity by itself may not be sufficient, but how do we actually have ways for people to connect as well before arriving at all this, the understanding, right? And with regard to the currency and payment, you have highlighted about the transparency. In fact, that's what the world could be looking into, to have that kind of flow of the fund, flow of the trade in a more transparent manner, such that it promote more accountability and also it allow greater visibility of how things are done. Right. Okay, thank you for that. And I'd like to move on to the next speaker. That is actually Dato' Henry Goh, who is the co-founder and the Group Chief Operating Officer of Macro Kiosk Malaysia.
All right, thank you, Dato'. Thanks for having me again, of course, and nice to talk to all these wonderful people and the guests. The key point here about the digital Silk Road, I think of course, it started by China in the sense they have this very visionary idea of this digital Silk Road. But I think it has now gone beyond just China. I think it must be a very global or even at least a very regional initiative for it to be very effective in that sense. In a way that, even with the COVID situation, even the COVID situation now in China where they have like a zero COVID policy in a sense, but trade has been going on. As you can see that trading with China is still quite robust over this period of time. And this is not something that happens overnight. And it's not something that happens because of World Trade Organization or WTO in its perspective. But then it's how digitalization and digital initiatives and technology, these are the ones that have given the opportunity for trade to continue, even in circumstances of COVID or even in circumstances of a COVID zero policy in a sense. The good part about it in the sense that China is a very well, it's a country that has plans in the very long term. Why I say that is that for me, my first exposure to China is actually in year 2003. That's the first year that I went to China and basically to start my first office in China in itself. And I'm able to, quite lucky that I stayed there for almost a year in Beijing. And at that time, why I say it's a very long planning for China is because at that time, their emphasis is towards having kind of like a digital Silk Road within China itself. So they're talking about how they can improve the supply chain between China, how they can build up digital technology between China, and how people like Alibaba, for example, is a very key milestone for that to happen. And obviously after that, I'm also quite fortunate that I can see the whole transition, that whatever they have learned in China, or China have learned in China by themselves, then they want to bring this out of China. And I think through the Digital Silk Road initiative, they are trying to bring this out to the world in itself. And I think they have gained some good milestone in that sense. Like for example, there's a digital free trade zone in KLA, Malaysia. And that is a very good example of how harmonization of tax clearance, for example, harmonization of how freight can be carried and being transported from China to Malaysia and be distributed around ASEAN in a very, very quick and fast manner. So, if someone had bought something from China, for example, through the free trade zone, you can feel that you can get the product between like 2-3 days with what used to be maybe 1-2 weeks or more. So in itself, that it is a very good showcase that this digital free trade zone through the Silk Road Initiative, Digital Silk Road Initiative, proved to be really effective in that sense. So I really think that we have already start seeing very good effect from Digital Silk Road Initiative. But I think to be further improving this initiative should not be something coming just from China, but rather than something that all of us, especially in ASEAN, needs to contribute and to build upon it in itself. Obviously, the key part also in the sense that when people talk about Silk Road or Digital Silk Road in itself, they also relate to the Belt and Road Initiative by China, in the sense that it's all about talking about getting investment in through borrowing money from China, for example, and try to build infrastructure like 4G, 5G, and things like that. But I think Digital Silk Road goes beyond just talking about getting the infrastructure up. It's also talking about how technology can be transferred to the recipient countries. And I think this is something that governments in this part of the world, for example, must learn, that it's not just about building your networks, it's not just about having investors or loans to help you to build your networks, but rather than how they should look at emphasizing the ability of technology transfer and to learn more and how to improve themselves rather than just that. So I think the whole idea about how different economies or governments are accepting the Digital Silk Road Initiative is quite different, but also in a way that's quite biased towards one angle, which they are not truly benefiting. The benefits are there, and I think these are benefits that governments or even private companies should look at. I mean, the last part would really be like digital currency. I think while I don't see it's directly just related to Silk Road, it is a whole world thing in that perspective. And I think it's a really good direction. Digital payments and digital currency would be a key forward. However, obviously, as always, human greed does drive a little bit. As you can see, a lot of cryptocurrency is truly overpriced. And I think some correction needs to happen after the bubble burst. But nevertheless, the technology, the initiative, the idea is perfect to counter things like maybe money laundering, to counter things like how can we do trade faster and in a more controlled manner, for example. So yeah, I mean, that's our share today. And yeah, I'll give back Dr. Wei.
Well, thank you, Dr. Henry Goh. Dr. Yan has now come back online. Welcome back, Dr. Yan. Just now we kind of miss you halfway. And may I pass the floor back to you? We have a room full of people, very high power people waiting to hear from you. Yeah.
Thank you. Sorry for the inconvenience. Now can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay. Then I continue. And just now, a gentleman also mentioned the Digital Silk Road. I think now the digital the Belt and Road Initiative will go into the 10th anniversary, and we'll go to the next step. Will be next 5 years. We always have 5-year plan. Next 5 year, I call it the Belt and Road Initiative. The initiative will go into the 3rd generation or 3rd version. This also will be the digital Silk Road. So that's why today I want to say within the RCEP framework and also between China and Asian countries, we should set up new digital channel access to help this kind of cooperation. Yeah, so the Silk Road Initiative will go to the next generation, I said, to the 3rd generation. I think this is very important for all of us and also all the countries, whoever have a relationship with the Silk Road. I think the most important, the digital trading will be one of the field we do. And even during the pandemic, the Chinese import and export still increasing very fast. Almost half now come to the online. That's the digital trading. And also the digital governance is another side for the corporation, and also digital logistics. That's why, because of this, we have started the cooperation from 2019 with UNCTAD. We signed an agreement. Also, we built we call the DODR, that's the digital trading infrastructure, and online dispute resolution. So this project, the first beneficial countries are in Asian countries. Last year we launched in Indonesia and Thailand. This will help the country.
All right, so I think we have to continue. All right, I'd like to invite. Wow, we have taken quite a bit of time. Our last speaker. Yeah, okay. Our last speaker for this first round before we kind of start the questions is Mr. Stanley Low. I understand that he could be in Canada. Are you, Mr. Low? Well, good evening or good very early morning.
Good evening. It's almost
Yes.
midnight.
Almost midnight. Yes. Thank you for joining us from across the globe, literally.
Right.
He's the CEO of the World Capacity Builders Incorporated, Canada. Mr. Low, please.
Okay. World Capacity Builders mission is to help the poor. So I'm going to speak for the poor in this forum. 4 billion people have not used the internet. 4 billion people. That's a lot. So while we're talking about the digital Silk Road, there are people who have not the privilege of using the internet. Those are the people who earn $2 a day. We need to help them earn $2.50 a day. So perhaps if we have better connectivity for them, number one, they can have an identity. There are 2 billion people in the world without identity. Without an identity, you cannot have a financial account. So you cannot have a wallet. And that's very telling. About 2 billion people do not have water, do not have clean water. So that's what we want to do, is to help them. And coming from Canada, I deal a lot with young founders of technology companies. My favorite question to them is, have you been to China? They're going to be the biggest market in the world. They're the biggest economic power in the world. Have you been? And I think this is my own opinion, because of Western media, they have painted such a bad picture of China. These young founders have not even thought about going to China. So that's this disparity that we need to cure. While we are working on the digital Silk Road and all this beautiful stuff that's going to happen, we need to bridge that gap. 2 gaps, one for the poor and one for the young founders. And that's my message today. Short and sweet.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Low, for sharing with us and, kind of bringing our awareness to that the bottom layers of the world population. Before we talk about the greater prosperity, how do we actually bridge the gap so that they can actually improve their income? They could also be exposed to, for the young founders, the world's largest market, and to be, in fact, the greatest economic power. Looks like you are asking more questions than offering answers. So
I don't
think
have the
you-
answer.
that's supposed to be my job as moderator, you know. No, don't worry. I'm sure you will offer some answers in a second round quickly. I think what I'd like to do is to invite each of the speakers here to, I'm going to throw some questions and then for you to kind of provide your insights in the respective area. I'm going to start with our Mr. Georg Chmiel, and I think just now I did not spell it in full. He's a co-founder and chair of Juwai IQI Holdings Malaysia, but not just Malaysia. He is actually having like global investment, global companies. My question is this. When we talk about the global supply chain in the context of the digital Silk Road, we know that usually, as I learned long time ago, there is this information flow. I think Dr. Henry's talked about information flow. That's why trade can flow, right? Even during pandemic. The second layer is actually the fund flow. Money can flow. Then the third layers will be the flow of goods and services. That's what we talk about trade. But you're dealing with property. How do you move property around and where do you see the opportunities in the context of the digital Silk Road?
Property gets purchased domestically, gets also purchased from overseas. And that's where you have like a situation where the property is in one country and the buyer is in a different country, where you have to overcome such boundaries. I mean, let's say banks are usually giving you the financing in the country where the property is in because they can assess it better. Often that's the most common case. Sometimes also in the country where the buyer is placed. And for all of that, there's a great demand for these regulations and simplifications and streamlining of the processes. In fact, I'm working in 8 companies, and one of them is actually one which has physical goods, which is really selling something which you can touch. I mean, you can touch a house, but like a consumer electronics, it's a company called Space Talk, and it's like watches. And for kids, so they don't get lost or get kidnapped and so on and so forth. It's quite successful, but the biggest challenge is always to stock enough watches in the different warehouses around the world. And obviously, being smart watches, you need computer chips inside. And you can already picture how complex it is to foresee. So we have like a 6 months lead time between when we want to sell something and when we want to order it. And I do believe that with simpler processes, which also Dr. Henry referred to with the digital free trade zone and other things, companies like ours could really benefit in improving their working capital significantly.
Yeah, wow, thank you. So you have added on an additional point apart from the property. But what you're suggesting is this information flow, fund flow, property need not flow, right? You just have to kind of invest in property or buy property anywhere. Or if you have properties, you can still sell to anyone in the world. So, but there's a need to harmonize some of the law, payment method, the fund flow. There are still more rooms there.
Absolutely. I mean, the biggest hurdle is actually always the financing. It's always the financing. First of all, getting approval, and then like for the bank to process it fast enough. You can Google it. In countries even like Australia, there are cases where people lost their house because the bank was a few days late in paying out the money and so on and so forth. This financing is the crucial bit.
Okay. I'm going to kind of continue on with this, you know, financing, payment, legal services across border. It is still a challenge, right? And we have heard our Indonesian speaker, Mr. Johannes Lokiman, talk about like the QR code payment and all this, right? Is one element, which is a so-called the actual payment transaction. And then there are still like, you know, conversion of currencies, values, and also the legal framework behind this. I would like you to comment on that, please. Yeah.
Sure. Thank you. I think ASEAN has set a very positive context for these discussions to occur. We've had the ASEAN finance ministers and central bankers meeting. I believe it was in Phnom Penh recently, and the +3 nations were also invited. So QR code was one of the discussions, but I think at the same time, we all have to be realistic about the fact that everyone is trying to restrict FX outflows from their country and trying to encourage FX inflows, right? So FX, a domestic currency settlement for QR code enabled payments is not in everyone's interest. But I think the most important thing is that, as one of the previous panelists said, China thinks in the long term. They think in 10, 20, 30, 50-year blocks, even beyond. So what does that mean? We are able and likely to reach a compromise where there's a win-win situation economically, right? And it doesn't need to happen in the short term. It can happen in the medium to long term. And I believe that when it comes to payments, they will look at not only at the settlement side or the payment side, but also look at the underlying transaction and who is winning and who is losing there. And with that kind of holistic view, I think the negotiations between ASEAN countries and ASEAN as a bloc and China when it comes to payments, settlements, and financing can be a lot more holistic than it would be with other countries. What does that mean practically? I think whereas with advanced nations, discussions in regards to payments and settlement are very much company driven, with China, usually it's top down. And that means that once the government has made a decision about wanting to enhance bilateral relationships, for example, between China and Indonesia, then it will try to facilitate that payment rail, maybe perhaps using a digital yuan or trying to decrease the friction in the payments, both on a practical side through the technology or on a fee-based side. And it will try to facilitate everything much faster than can be done, or sorry, more holistically than can be done when two companies are talking about the same thing. So overall, I still believe that if we were to invest the appropriate time and effort in taking these discussions with China, that a good win-win situation can be achieved. There are obstacles, of course. Respective countries have their interests, but in the end, China has left behind its communist roots and is now a socialist country with unique Chinese characteristics, I think the official phrase is. And so as a country, they're more capitalist than almost any country on the world. So as long as business is at the forefront, no strings tied, no political baggage, I think we can all come to an amicable resolution, especially when it comes to payments.
Well put.
I think we have a couple more questions, and we also have, I think from the audience here, Tan Sri Lee also seems to have a question. I think, could you kind of give us input in like a minute or two, please? Yeah, thank you.
Sure. Because of digital payments, there is a dire need for continuous authentication of the users. Because fraud is everywhere. It's so continuously raining on me every day. We need to have continuous multifaceted authentication so that when you are transferring funds, you know that it is you who is transferring the funds, it is him who is accepting the funds. That is a huge challenge today.
Right. I think we collectively must find a solution more in the area of technology as well as the law and the regulation.
Right. And in between, nobody is charging an arm and a leg for doing it.
Yeah, okay. And lower the cost. And I just want to make one observation. So a lot of kind of frauds are like raining on you. You must be pretty rich. It's okay.
They've taken all my money.
Yeah, well, I just want to make sure that, the crowd, the audience here could feel relaxed, because after lunch, we need to pull a bit of tricks. I think just quickly to ask Mr. Siriwat a quick question about, just now you touched on the supply chain. And these days people are talking about localizing the supply chain rather than practicing the global supply chain. And instead of just in time, now they need to stock up, like what Georg has said, because just in case, right, you don't have the supply. What is your comment about, that while we are developing a lot of connectivity, but we are also reconfiguring the supply chain very rigorously in the region?
Yes, thank you, Dato, for the question. Localization is very important for different aspects, different factors. We see that, just talking about things becoming more digital and connected, it's not enough. We need more tangible and practical processes. A lot more, let's say, exchanges, right? Because not everything that is done digitally and online can replace what we do in real life. I think that's certain. We've seen that in the last 2 years, although COVID-19 has caused so many different problems for us, in a way, without that, we would never have reached this level of comfort doing things online, our ability to conduct meetings and interact and exchange information and data. So it was, let's say, a blessing in disguise. And with that, not to completely substitute, but to understand when it is the right time to do things online and digitally, and when it can be used to, let's say, supplement what we do in person. And so localizing supply chains and setting up the right, let's say, connections and infrastructure, that has to be done hand in hand. So we're not trying to substitute or replace, but we try to, let's say, reconfigure the way that we did things before. Whatever, let's say, was unnecessary or can be switched or be done more efficiently online, we should do so. But whatever is remaining, we should try to make it more effective and more efficient in that way. So that's just my comment. Thank you.
All right. Yeah, I'd like to open up the same question about this localizing, regionalizing the supply chain versus globalizing supply chain. Would our panelists like to chip in? Mr. Loh, you want to chip in on this?
I'm going to beg off that because I'm a rookie in that area.
Mr. Moderator, I'd like to add, if you allow. I think we're now seeing a move away from what was essentially China as the world's biggest just-in-time factory to now having what can simply be put as a more distributed manufacturing chain, if you will, and also the necessity of having more buffer stock than before for whatever inputs it is that you have into your intermediate products. And so I believe that this will actually require, as was previously mentioned by one of the panelists, significant changes in how we look at financing, because trade financing will have to change along with the sort of change of timing along the supply chain. And I also think this presents us with an opportunity, right? When we're talking about the Silk Road, we're talking about standards of the flow of payments and goods on that Silk Road. We'll need to be aware of the standards going forward and how they develop, and how there's an opportunity for us to redistribute this manufacturing capacity, but still remain on that Silk Road. So it is important for us to be part of that Silk Road roadmap, if you will, because if you build those assets off the Silk Road, then you won't be included in the sort of potential growth going forward.
Yeah, thank you. I think you stressed a lot on the standards, right, to fit into the the current and the future supply chain. Dr. Enrico,
just a quick one.
Yeah.
I think the point now is that while localization is one thing, I always believe that no country can be an island. I think in a sense, maybe Singapore or Australia, but generally, in a sense that globalization is really the key to go. I think the situation that we face now in supply chain situation is really because digitalization is not enough yet. I think they have not fully digitalized enough in that sense. And I think that's where the digital Silk Road tried to overcome the situation they were facing now. We see that the issue here is really in the sense that the rich countries are hoarding, they are overbuying in the fear that this supply will be limited. But why are they doing it is simply because they do not have enough data, they do not maximizing data, and they are not using digitally enough for them to comfortably buy what is enough and not hoarding, and probably the world will be a much better place in terms of the supply chain issues if more digital technology is being put in place and being maximized to the benefit of everyone. Yeah.
Right. Oh, thank you. Well, not digitalized enough. All right. I'd like to invite Tan Sri Lee if you have a question.
Yeah, thank you, Dato'. In fact, just now I raised my hand. I just want to say hello to Stanley Loh. Long time no see. I think last time we met.
Yeah.
But I'd like to respond also. Always you are very passionate about helping the poor. This morning, actually, when I do my presentation, I skip one slide, which I call CBDC, the New World Order. Whether we like it or not, I think we had to believe the emerging of digital currency, blockchain. These are technology that I believe it will lead to every individual, entrepreneurs especially, that you want to use the technology to benefit society, or you just purely make profit for yourself. I see the first wave. We see the first wave of the Bitcoin from 4,000 to 6,000, now to 17,000. And we see Luna collapse, the collapsing of Luna recently, the exchange of the facts. All this, I think technology, when it started, a lot of young people, they think they can own the world. But I say CDBC, a new world order. Actually, I also want to spark everybody in this to really start thinking. We talk about localization, globalization. Whether we like it or not, human being, there's a proverb saying, 人为以财死，鸟为以食亡. Human, because of money, even you kill each other, the bird come out just for food. We look at the world now, the world order now, with the Ukraine-Russian war, with US don't allow them to use a SWIFT code. I believe actually CBDC, central bank digital currency, which internationally, I believe the big power still want to be like US. If you touch the, what you call the sovereignty, or you touch the power that I can freely print US currency, you will be in deep trouble, So I believe CBDC going forward with digitalization, the wealth distribution using digitalization, or anybody want to issue currency on, I think the key value of the trust are still very important, the human trust. So how to digitalize those your hard-earned money or your asset, either that asset is belong to a country, belong to corporation, belong to institution, belong to individual. I believe cryptocurrency must be based on asset going forward to really make the order. If not, the continue of printing currency, it will come to the point that it will have a very imbalanced and a very unfair world. That is my opinion. That's why I say CBDC is a new world order going forward. And I also like to pose a question to Indonesia, Mr. Lukiman. So I also understand recently Indonesian had come out, Garuda. Is it what you call a sovereignty central bank digital currency, or is it by anybody? And I hope maybe you can enlighten me, because I am waiting Malaysian government to come out a CBDC, and when they come out a CBDC, we can use a traditional way of banking with the digital innovation, and I believe the wealth creation, the wealth distribution, we can use digitalization. And of course, I'm also a rookie, also dumb in the computer, but just for coincidence, last 4 years, I spent a lot of time on the study blockchain technology, studying this what you call the trading platform and also wallet. And that's why I started a bank called LI Bank. And I have my structure, but I'm waiting for a country, you know. In fact, China, it come out, was very excited. And suddenly China have really pulled a break, only do the testing of their CDBC. They rename it one time already. So I think it's very interesting to know Indonesia is now coming out of their CDBC. So maybe we can get some enlightenment from you. Thank you.
Thank you, Tan Sri Lee. And yeah, Mr. Lukiman. So what is that? Garuda, Malaysia has mask, you know?
Thank you. Tan Sri, you always ask the most interesting questions, just like you did when we met last at the Captains of Industry meeting in Jakarta. You're very up to date. Project Garuda, and it's still a project, has just been finalized in terms of the design stage, I think sometime about 2 weeks ago. So yes, Indonesia is not only considering a CBDC, it has already confirmed that it will issue a CBDC. But while the plan and design is complete, the timeline is not yet complete. There will be a few stages. If I'm not mistaken, the CBDC that is under Project Garuda will be rolled out in 3 phases. So the first is Project Garuda will be rolled out to enable wholesale payments. So it will be primarily an interbank payment rail. But for the second phase, it will also be used for money markets. So not only for the wholesale payments, but the second phase will be for interbank market and monetary markets. And only in the third phase, once it's been proven to be stable, once it's been proven to be reliable and secure, then in the last phase, the Project Garuda currency, for which the name has not yet been determined, will be available for retail customers, for retail payments, and to also fund C2C transfers. I think right now we're testing digital rupiah tokens. On a working level, we're calling it the digital rupiah. The head of payment systems policy said that we'll be using this within the next 5 years already. So we're very excited. I think we'll be one of the first in ASEAN. Singapore, as usual, is trying to beat us to it, but we'll see how we go. But regardless of, I think, intra-region competitiveness, I do agree that digital currency, whether that's CBDC or crypto or whatever other digital currency it is going to be a very important part of our financial landscape to come.
Wow.
Can I ask Mr. Lukiman a question?
Oh, yes.
You-
I think we are wrapping up in the next 3 minutes. A quick question and quick
Quick
answer, please.
question.
Yes.
Mr. Lukiman, do you think the current ISO 222, is it a conspiracy? And is the fall of FTX a conspiracy?
That seems like a conspiracy.
Somebody doesn't want me to speak.
Somebody doesn't want him to answer. Okay, I think we are coming to the end, actually. So I would like to ask each and every speaker to take like a 10-20 seconds to give us your outlook about, the future with regard to that, the digital future. All right. I start with Georg.
Yes. And I also would like to welcome Stanley over there on the other side of the world. Always a pleasure being on the panel with you. I keep it short. I do believe that ultimately humans and technology need to catch up. One can't go to.
And the government can actually keep up to those latest technology in that sense, yeah.
Thank you. And how about Siriwat's gone. Okay, so while we come to the end of this session, I really want to thank all. Sorry, who is back? This is a different group, right? Siriwat, can you hear me?
No, we're back. Yeah,
Yes, I
Say
can,
something
We're
if you
back.
can hear me.
I can
we're
hear
back. Yeah.
If not, it's okay because we are wrapping up. I would like to thank all our panel speakers. Could you please join me to thank them by showing you a big clap? I hope that we have actually gained some interesting idea about Digital Silk Road, along the supply chain, the trade, what was less spoken about was this digital foreign relation, because in the context of trade war, in the context of the New World Order, but I think we could actually have other sessions to explore more about this. And lastly, I think we have a nice wrap up about the central bank digital currency. And thank you very much, everyone. Thank you.